I haven't been doing much in here lately. Today I had a little bit of an accident. Somebody rear-ended me because as I was coming home from a hike, a little duck had crossed the road just right at the last minute out here, and I put on, hit the brakes so I wouldn't hit that little duck. And some jackass hit me from behind. My car suffered a little bit of damage, my SUV, but his car was pretty damaged, the front. But there was these witnesses. Oh, I was at fault. It's all her fault. It's all her fault. That's not the way the law works. And some jackass comes over and says, I should have hit the duck. You have to hit the duck. Now, bullshit. I ain't hitting anything. So go to hell on that. And after the cop came, the other guy was cited. So I hope that's the end of that shit. And I never hear it again. And so I've been sick the last few days with the damn sinus infection. It was a monster. And so I'm gonna take one more day off work. Shit, what else? Well, anyway, there's just a lot of crap going on in the news, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to talk about, but, I've been doing a lot of, I'm 70 now, and I've been kind of going back to the distant past, going way back, and back to childhood. And, of course, I was thinking of, like, last month, and the end of March, the deaths of two people that were kind of a part of my childhood, you might say. Jay North, who was on Dennis the Menace, and he passed away early in April from colon cancer. And of course Richard Chamberlain, who received international fame in Dr. Kildare in the early 60s, and died at the age of almost 91. He was 2 days short of his 91st birthday, and he had some series of strokes, I believe it was. He died at his home in Hawaii. And of course everybody gets older. Jay North was only what was he, 73, 74 years old, something like that. He wasn't much older than me. He was born in 51, but he was born late that year, so he was a little over 3 years older. But, you don't realize, I guess you don't realize how old you really are until you hear about people that were well-known performers in your childhood and in your youth die. And so I thought, well, I'll talk a little bit about these shows. And I ordered a bunch of DVDs. I've ordered the whole series of Dennis the Menace. And when I was a kid, I wasn't that big a fan of the show because I thought Jay North was obnoxious. But of course, that was the part, that's what the part called for. But you look at it now, and it was the episodes I've seen, and I've just started watching the first season, and I have all 4. And he was good in that. And not only that, some of those episodes were downright side-splitting hilarious. And of course, the big thing about that show was Joseph Kearns, who played Mr. Wilson. And the rapport between Dennis and Mr. Wilson was really something. They had, Jay North and Joseph Kearns had great rapport. They had great chemistry together. And when Joseph Kearns died in 1962 of a cerebral hemorrhage, that kind of negatively impacted the show. And I think it was Gail Gordon who took over in the final season. And it didn't really work. It's kind of like with Mr. Ed, when Larry Keating, who was just a fabulous actor, and he had died of cancer, in one of the later seasons, and the show wasn't the same, so it didn't do as well. It lasted longer than Dennis the Menace did after a key cast change like that. But apparently Joseph Kearns, it was said that he was on a Metrical diet, and that was a real popular diet drink in the early 60s. They heavily advertised it and stuff, and he reportedly lost something like 40 or 50 pounds on that quickly. So that may have contributed to his somewhat premature death. But that was a hilarious show. But Jay North, apparently he had been abused by his aunt and his uncle. And that had to be hard. When you're a young kid and you have to deal with that kind of crap, that had to be really hard. And he had to deal with that, and he overcame that. And then later I think he became, let's see, what was he? A probation officer? Let me find out. After acting. Okay, he'd acted for a long time after that. And he was with Paul Peterson's organization. And let's see. He did memorabilia shows after he worked through the problems of being abused. But I think, he became a correctional officer in Florida. And he did that for a long time, and then he passed away after battling that disease. But, gosh damn, that was pretty bad. And everybody seemed to really have liked him. He seemed to be a very well-liked individual. And it's just kind of a bummer that he died. Well, it is a bummer. And then, of course, the bigger obit of the two was Richard Chamberlain, mainly because he had such a long career. And I had looked at his high school yearbook. I thought, I'm going to go look this stuff up on classmates. And he graduated from Beverly Hills High School. He grew up in Southern California. And he had at least one brother that I think was older. But he grew up in Southern California. He went to Beverly Hills High School. And I thought, he looked like an athlete. And yes, indeed he was. He was actually a track athlete. He was quite involved in that. And if you find his senior yearbook there, he's all over the yearbook. He's in like the music stuff, and he was into drama, and then he was an athlete in track. And he had the build for track. He had that tall, somewhat lanky build. And, of course, he was good-looking then. He never really changed. It's funny. His looks never changed that much. He still looked like the same person. Even in his 80s that he did, you knew it was the same person than he was in his 20s or even in his teens. Looked the same. And some people are like that. They never seem to change much. Lillian Gish was another one. And she looked the same. There was never any doubt. Whereas some other people could look totally different as they age. But he didn't. He didn't change much. But as I said, he was in everything as in high school. And then he went to Pomona College. And then after that, he went into the Army for a couple of years. And he was a sergeant. So he had all that background, but he was into acting. And then finally when he was done with that, then he went into it full time. And he ended up with starring in this television show, which apparently, from what I could get, the first choice for Dr. Kildare was William Shatner, but Shatner declined it, which was good. He was in at least one episode that I've come across, playing a doctor. He would have been all wrong for that. And then another choice was James Franciscus, and I think I've talked about him. I know I've talked about him on a video. And he looked a lot like Richard Chamberlain. They both looked very similar, except Chamberlain was 2 months younger, exactly, and about 3 inches taller, 4 inches taller than Franciscus. But Franciscus had other commitments, so he couldn't commit to the role. So Richard Chamberlain had that part, and he was very good in it, and I will say that. And when I was a kid, when that premiered in 1961, I was 6 years old, and I never watched it. And I think it was on NBC. I never watched it. My family, they preferred either CBS or ABC, and so I know we watched Ben Casey, which was another great series, but we never, I don't think we ever watched this one. So he was on that, and that show and Ben Casey started the same year, 1961. They both went off the air in 1966. And then, of course, Chamberlain did movie roles, television roles, especially in miniseries like the Thornbirds and Thornbirds and Shogun and a bunch of other shows that he was in. And he did an awful lot of live theater performances. He spent a lot of time doing that. And he had many awards. He never got an Emmy, but he had a lot of awards for his acting over the years, and he had a long career at it. And, you know, it had to be tough. I mean, of course, we got to say what we got to say, but it had to be tough for him because he was a gay man. And he was this heartthrob. And let me tell you, I was a little girl back in those days when he became the big sensation. And he didn't just do acting, he was also a singer, and he was actually a pretty good singer. But I'm going to tell you, you know, he was the heartthrob, even more than Vince Edwards was, or any of the others of that era. And, you know, he had to be closeted, and that was tough. And even when he came out, after everybody already knew that he was, he'd been outed, I think, by some French publication in the late 80s. But even then, you know, there were rumors before that. So everybody knew, but then he still didn't feel comfortable talking about it until he did that memoir or whatever in 2003, and then he decided, okay, I'll admit it. And of course, nobody thought anything of it. Even the women that had crushes on him, you know, they might have written fan mail to him back in his prime, in his late 20s, but early 30s. But it didn't matter. You know, everybody pretty much accepted it. But back in those days, I'm sorry about the coughing with this sinus crap. But back then, it would have ruined his career. There was no way he could. So anyway, so he had that, and he came to terms with it, and he had a pretty good life, I think, up to the end. But and he was blessed not just with good looks. He was also blessed with longevity in his family, because I was looking that up on Find a Grave, and there were a lot of his family lived to be pretty old, 80s and 90s even. So he had a pretty good genetics. But but anyhow, you know, he was really a good actor, and he was good on that show. And I've only got the first season. I'm getting the second season. And he was, you know, very good. He played an intern, and of course that Dr. Kildare series was based on the movie series, which starred Lou Ayres. And I wanted to find out about Lou Ayres, if Lou Ayres ever guested on the television version, and no, he never did. And apparently, I'm kind of doing this I'm doing everything off the cuff, but when I looked it up, about Lou Ayres that he was offered a role in in the 1950s for a medical type oriented program. Ayres turned it down, and the reason he turned it down is because of tobacco sponsorship. And he was an ardent anti-smoker from way back. And in fact, there were quite a few non-smokers, even back in the golden age of Hollywood. Even when they had to use a cigarette as a prop, like Mae West would do, or Claude Rains, and they were not smokers. Even that, there were plenty of non-smokers. But back then, you know, especially, you know, in the 50s and early 60s, before the Surgeon General's report, yeah, tobacco was heavily involved in sponsorship of television shows. And the thing that shocks me about Dr. Kildare and any of these shows, but especially if it's supposed to be medical, everybody smoked on there, even the people that played, you know, the doctors. And how weird that looks from the vantage point of the 21st century, you know, the third decade of the 21st century. It's just, and 60 years out, it just looks bizarre. It's just really strange. And that's what dates them, is the smoking. And, but, you know, it was pretty much the deal. And then I was thinking, you know, when I go back on, well, first of all, before I go on that tangent, I also want to say that this show had the best theme music ever of any television series. I think it'd be argued. And Jerry Goldsmith, I think was his name, wrote the theme music. What the hell was it called? Three Stars Will Shine Tonight. And Richard Chamberlain also had a little hit with it. He had a lot of hits, actually, with his singing career. But they played that theme at the end of each episode. And it was just great. And you know, the thing about it is, it's kind of sad. It's kind of a sad theme song. I mean, it can induce the tears on that one. And but it's the best one that was probably ever composed. And that era had lots and lots of great theme music. And I'm talking instrumental theme music that was scored like a movie. You had that, and Cimarron Strip is another one by Maurice Jarre, who composed the music for Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. And that was a great theme music, Cimarron Strip, which only lasted a season. And I might have talked about it on some video. So anyway, when I think about it, I think it can be argued that television series in the early 60s were probably especially the dramas, were probably the best ever made. And this was one, Ben Casey was another, The Defenders was another, Route 66 was another, Naked City was another, and probably, I would say, the greatest of them all was The Fugitive. And they were just tremendous shows. They've held up beautifully decades later. And it was of a simpler, more idealistic time. And, you know, Kennedy was president when this Dr. Kildare, and some of those others had debuted. And it was, you know, it was before all, you know, the murders and the war in Vietnam and all that stuff, the riots and Nixon and all the rest of it. It was a different time. It was an idealistic time until reality hit them in the face. But yeah, the shows were better written then. I mean, that's one thing where I will brag up the 50s and the 60s is in television, because the writing was so good. And it's not just rose-colored glasses. You can go back, and I do, and I have so many television series on DVD that, you know, I enjoy them. And I'll get this whole series. But anyway, enough of that. I thought, you know, I'm just going to say, kind of remember those two actors, because they did play a role in my very youthful life. And then, but to get into, to kind of segue, and I'm only not going to be on here very long, much longer. And this damn bunch, they will not quit. They will never quit. These anti-abortion nutters will never quit. And they try to criminalize all abortions as homicide. And a lot of these abolitionists, well, look at them. What do you notice here? They're all, you know what? You don't see a woman in sight, do you? They're just, these guys are just afraid of losing control. They're completely and totally afraid of losing control. And it's, and there's no turning back the clock. They can try to shame women all they want and try to make them into sexual property again. But they're going to fail. So anyway, I'm kind of, my voice is kind of running out. But there's a lot of extremism that's going on in the States. I mean, as I said, I can hardly stand to look at the news, because there's some outrageous shit that Trump is always pushing, like trying to reopen Alcatraz and that shit. And what else? Oh God, I forget. I can't even go there. There's just so much idiocy that's coming out of that damn president. Anything that's a distraction. And anyway, but I thought, you know, I would just kind of talk about random things here. And anyway, I'm kind of done for until the next time. So that's it.